Hello and welcome. My name is Vanessa Ortali. I am the founder of the Ladies Community and Heart and Mind Talks. Today we are here with Gillian Mandich for our summit, The One. And the theme of this summit is one with self, one with purpose, one with others. And Gillian is a happiness researcher. And so I thought it'd be perfect to bring her on today to give us some tips of how to find happiness and how that actually links to one with self, one with others, one with purpose, because I believe you can't find happiness if you're not all of those things. And so welcome, Gillian. I'm so happy to have you here. How did you get into happiness research?
Hi, Vanessa. I'm so happy to be here.
Yeah,
So, it's funny because sometimes I look back now and I think I have one of the best jobs in the world.
I
And
think you do.
I
You
I
can
get
take
to
that
read about
statement.
and
Yeah.
learn about happiness every day. And really, at the end of the day, we all want to be happy. And how do you figure that out? But it's interesting. I sat down with my guidance counselor in high school and was like, when I grow up, I want to be a happiness researcher. I didn't even know that was a thing. And I actually started researching childhood obesity. So I have a master's degree in child and youth health, and I was studying childhood obesity and physical activity and sedentary behaviors in kids. And I started looking into the research, and what I realized was that our weight is a number on a scale. And if I'm using that number to figure out if I can help somebody or not in a research situation, I was really struggling with that because you can be overweight and obese and be healthy, and you cannot be overweight and obese and not be healthy. So I started looking into the literature to see, well, if weight isn't a good benchmark to help, what is? And I sort of stumbled into happiness research because basically happiness and health are highly correlated. So when you compare unhappy people to happy people live longer, they have lower rates of cardiovascular disease, they heal faster from injury, they tend to make better health choices, they sleep better. So I thought, if my area of research is health promotion, which it is, really, this is a great way to promote health. And not only that, it's really the benefits of focusing and prioritizing your happiness are far reaching to every area of not just your own life physically, but how you show up with other people, your relationships at work. All of these different things can be impacted by just looking at your happiness. So I switched and never looked back.
I love your holistic approach of how you got to happiness because it shows me your thought process of where that link between weight and self and happiness comes in, which is so important. People are talking about fitness and food all the time. They don't talk about happiness. So I love that you bring that in. What do you say to people? Because happiness is this word that is also misunderstood. And so many people think, it's an illusion. We're always chasing something. What does that mean to you in your research, and what have you found?
Yeah, happiness is like one of those words. It's kind of like love, right? Where we all have like a basic understanding of what the word means. But if you try to put it into words, it can be really difficult. And it becomes even more difficult when you're a happiness researcher because at the beginning of your study, you have to define all your terms. So in research, you'll see terms floating around besides happiness, like subjective well-being, positive well-being, different terms like that. And they generally are kind of getting at the same thing. So the definition that I often use in research when I study happiness comes from Dr. Sonia Lubomirsky. And happiness is the experience of joy, contentment, and positive well-being combined with a sense that one's life is good, meaningful, and worthwhile. So I like this definition because it kind of has two elements, like how you're feeling, but then also this idea of like meaning or purpose. So there's sort of a deeper, further reaching than just in the moment happiness. And then like happiness is tricky too because it can look so different for different people. Culturally, it can look different. And, I sit with this and even when I was preparing for my PhD defense, I was like really afraid, are we going to get into what's happiness? But at the end of the day, if we all define it a little bit differently or we all experience it a little bit differently, that's okay because it's such a personal thing. And it's more about how we feel than about even necessarily taking that and putting it into words,
Yeah.
And sometimes emotions are hard to capture in words. They really are. And that's kind of where the English language can fall short in a way, because like to be able to capture a feeling in words doesn't do it justice. But at the end of the day, we all kind of have an understanding of what it is. And so I think that's the important piece.
Do you think people know if they're happy or they're not happy?
So research shows that people are actually pretty good at measuring or assessing their own happiness. So even like you might be wondering, like how do you measure happiness? What does that look like? So we have a lot of in research, like validated tools that you can use that you'll get like a score. So you might be like a 2.4 or 4.3 or whatever on different, there's scales like the Oxford Happiness Index or the Subjective Happiness Scale. And the number itself doesn't really tell you a whole lot. But when you track things over time, you can see if things are going up and down, and you can give you sort of a way to compare people. But at the same time, when you look at even like measuring happiness or something, it changes throughout the day, right? Like you can wake up, be in a great mood, and then you get in traffic, and then you're not in a good mood, and then you get a great call from a friend, and then you are, and then you get emails and you're not. So it's transient over time too. So it's one of those things where it's really kind of tricky to capture it. But we can actually, research shows that our self-reported assessment of our happiness is pretty good. But what we're not good at is assessing what makes us happy. So oftentimes the things that we think make us happy don't bring us as much happiness as we may think they do or anticipate that they will, and it doesn't last as long. So it's kind of interesting to see, like, we can tell if we're happy or not, but we don't really know what makes us happy.
And how can we get more information on that so that we're following things that make us happy?
I love this question. And you know what? It's interesting. So when I do research, if I'm doing some interviews with participants and I ask, what makes you happy? This is totally anecdotal, but it happens a lot. Like I would say more than 50% of the time I get like a blank stare back, or like they really have to think about it. And at first I was kind of like surprised by that. But then I even like was reflecting in my own life, and I'm like, how often do we actually take the time to think about the things that make us happy? And then if in another question I ask a participant, are you happy? And they say no, I started thinking about it. And I'm like, okay, well, a lot of people don't know what makes them happy. So no wonder they're not happy, right? If you don't know what you're looking for, then how do you know if you're going to find it? So I think that step one in all of our happiness stuff, it really comes back to that awareness piece and starting to figure out for yourself, what are the things that you do in your life that make you happy? And knowing that, once you kind of have that baseline of what are those things, then you can look at how do I do more of that in my life and how can I kind of build from there. But step one is really sitting with what makes you happy. A lot of other participants will also say, like I'll get, my wife, my kids, my whatever, like sort of top level things, but they don't really actually sit with like deep, like you're talking about like the one, right? Like when you go into yourself, like what are those things at your core that truly bring you? And there's also that distinction between like, if you eat a piece of chocolate cake, you feel great in the moment and maybe not so much after. There's other things that you can do. Like, for example, if you're volunteering, where you get that like more meaningful, deep feeling of it. It's not just this very fleeting, moment or experience of happiness. So then it can kind of get into different things too, because it's absolutely okay to do those little things that bring you happiness, but you also want to think about what are those things that really like fuel your soul, that fill your heart, because that's when you start to prioritize that, when you really start to see benefits of prioritizing your happiness.
I see the same thing when I talk to my clients about alignment and them finding when they're at their best. And I often ask them, well, what makes you happy? When do you feel at your best? And it's really hard for them. So I think awareness might be a really good first step for people to get there.
Yeah, for sure.
What other tips do you have for people to be more happy and find more happiness in their life?
Yeah. So the first thing, it was actually when I first started studying happiness, I wasn't sure, because like, you know how you meet some people and they're really happy, positive people, and then you meet some people that are more like Eeyores, right? So I always wondered, like, is this like a nature versus nurture thing? Like, are we some people born happier, or is it a learned behavior? And so what was really interesting in happiness research is it's hard to also tease out what's environmental versus what's genetic, right? Like even when I was studying obesity, if a child came in to my study that was living with obesity, and their parents were as well, it's hard to tease out, is this a genetic thing versus is this environmental, or maybe a combination of both? So with happiness, what researchers were actually able to do was take genetically identical twins that were separated at birth. So then you have same genetics, separate environments. You can really start to learn a lot about what is genetic versus not. And so in terms of happiness, about half of our total capacity for happiness is genetic. So yes, some people are naturally predisposed to be happier than other people. And at the same time, that's only up to half of our capacity. About 10% of our happiness is our environment. So where we live, where we work, And I actually had to read that stat a few times when I first read it, because I'm like, what? Like, what if you hate your job? Or what if you're, don't like where you are in your life right now? But we're actually really adaptive creatures as humans. And so even though we may say, for example, not like our job, we go there every day. So we're actually kind of used to it. Like our body adapts, so it doesn't have as profound of an effect as we may think it does. And so then if we think about, okay, so 50% is genetics, 10% is environment, the remaining 40%, that is our thoughts, our actions, and our behaviors. So that's the piece of our happiness that's within our control. That's the part that above all of that stuff, we have some personal responsibility to build that muscle. And so as a happiness researcher, all of my work focuses on that 40%, because can't really change your genetics. You can maybe change the expression a little bit. Environment is very difficult to change. So if we're looking at like low hanging fruit to really boost our happiness, focusing on our thoughts, our actions, and our behaviors, our mind, our attitude, what we think, how we act, all of that is a really big piece of the happiness equation, and something that all of us, no matter how happy or unhappy you're feeling right now, have the capacity to build a happiness muscle and to get stronger to increase that happiness. Isn't that cool?
I think that's really neat. The one time I also dove into this was I was doing this random like spiritual birth and parent reflection.
Uh-huh.
And one of the questions was to ask your mom or to find out what was going on when you were in the womb.
Oh,
And it was
interesting.
really neat. And so I was asking, my mom has passed away, but I was asking my dad what was going on when I was in the womb
Mm-hmm.
versus my brother to see if it actually affected some of our genetics and
Mm-hmm.
how we were brought up. And there were some similarities. So it
Interesting.
was really neat. I don't know how much science there is behind all that like womb stuff and how much it changes your genetics based on what's going on at the time of your birth and when you're growing. But it's kind of a neat question. So maybe you want to go ask your mom or your parents what
Yeah.
was going on when you were being made.
That's
That's so cool. Yeah. What are some good reflection questions that
mhm.
people can ask themselves about happiness and purpose to get them kind of in that trajectory and just thinking about it a little bit differently?
Yeah, I think this is a this is a great question about questions, but it is because when I think about, like, a lot of times people don't know what makes them happy, and myself included, like trying to figure that out. And it really takes sitting with yourself and really being in that uncomfortable, quiet space to really get in touch with that. And so I think step one is like turn down the volume on your life so that you can listen to what's going on inside. Because especially in today's day and age when we're so distracted and there's so many notifications and there's so much stuff going off, that I feel like when your brain is so full and busy and overstimulated, it's not even possible to really tap in and to sit with those questions with yourself. So like for myself, what I do is I try to create time every day for quiet. And it can be really hard, but that's when I do my thinking. And I actually will just like sit there and think about things or reflect on things. And when you start to do that, you can start to think about in your day, or even an activity that I'll tell people to do sometimes if they're trying to figure out what makes them happy, is I'll say, take out the notes in your phone or a pen and paper, whatever. And as you go through your day, write down everything you do. And then when you're done that activity, put, does this make me more happy or less happy? And then at the end of the day, you can look back at your list and you can start to see, because sometimes, especially in our daily life, we're so busy and we've got like a million things to do and we just go, 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 go. And we don't take the time to stop and even reflect for a second. So by starting to bring some intentionality into the things that you're doing every day, you can not only check in with like, how do you feel? Or are you feeling happier or not? But you can start to bring more awareness, like we were talking about earlier, right? Like more awareness to your life. And I think that I don't want to look back at the end of my life and like feel like I blinked and then I'm there. I really don't want to be a robot, somebody on autopilot. And when you can tune into your happiness, I feel like it can really take away that automaticity of life, because you're really focusing on your feelings and why you're doing things, because you are trying to create that feeling of happiness and trying to bring more joy into your life. So you can actually like experience life as opposed to just like living life, you know?
Yeah, I think the awareness part is the most important. And even
Yeah.
that's why I love this conversation, because like you said, people don't think about what actually makes them happy. So I hope when people listen to this interview, they just start reflecting, am I
Mm.
happy? What makes me happy? What is my emotional state throughout the day? And just start that conversation. I actually brought this up in another interview, but I was one of those people who outwardly seemed very happy and very
Mhm.
optimistic. But to that 40%, my inner dialogue based on my conditioning wasn't happy. So
Mhm.
I had to do that work and reflection and think, I don't think I'm actually happy. I think I'm quite sad internally, even though externally I'm optimistic and positive. Right. So I had to start doing that work and breaking down the conditioning so that there was more of that alignment and I could actually be happy on a daily basis.
Yeah, and it's interesting. Like I hear kind of the same thing a lot from people, and I think it's kind of, especially in today's day and age where we have social media, where everybody posts these beautiful glossy photos, smiling and everything. That I think, and actually, this was something I was really surprised to learn when I started studying happiness. Is I used to think when I started, my goal in researching happiness is figure out how do I be happy all the time. And I was actually really surprised to learn that the goal isn't to be happy all the time. And I would never tell anybody that you need to be happy all the time. In fact, if you think about and research healthy psychological functioning, we need this spectrum of emotions to really experience the palette of what it's like to be a human. So we need to have times where we feel sad or frustrated or angry or joyful or happy, or it's really about embracing whatever emotions are coming and you're feeling them. And so sometimes I think people try to portray happy or act happy because they feel like they should, I'm doing like air quotes, like should be happy, as opposed to really feeling all of the feelings and knowing that you're not going to be happy all the time. And nor would I ever suggest to somebody that the goal is to be happy all the time. What I do think is that as you start to build your happiness muscle, your lows get higher and then your highs get higher. So you see this sort of uptrend of emotion. So when you're feeling really sad, feel it fully. Don't marinate in it for like a week or two, right? But really feel your feelings. And then over time, as you go, your lows will get higher and your highs will get higher. So that's kind of the direction that we want to go. But if you're listening right now, like you can take the pressure off yourself and you don't need to feel guilt if you're not happy all the time, because that's not the goal.
Yeah, I think one of the other things for me is as I become happier, and I think it's an ongoing journey, I become less tolerant of when I'm not happy because I can feel the difference, right? And I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
I become a lot more aware when I'm not there. But one thing
Mm-hmm.
that's also neat is my low days now used to be my happy days. And my happy days back then are now, my low days. So it just continues to evolve as we get more understanding of ourselves and where our emotions stay within that spectrum.
Yeah, and I love that you chose the word evolve, because I think that's another really important piece to remember about happiness is that you don't arrive at happiness. Like it's not an endpoint or like a destination. It sounds like a Pinterest quote or something, but it's true. Like happiness is a practice. It's not a destination. You don't just like one day reach happiness and then you're good. I often think about it like nobody would ever go into the gym and have like the best workout of their life and then leave the gym and be like, I've reached fitness, I'm done, right? Or like drink a smoothie with all the superfoods and then finish the smoothie and be like, you know what, I'm done. Like I've reached nutritional wellness. I don't have to do this again. But for some reason, we apply a different pattern of thinking to happiness. I will be happy when I have X amount of dollars in my bank, when I have a certain partner, X amount of kids, live wherever, work wherever. We tell ourselves that story, which goes back to how we're not actually as good as we think we are at figuring out what makes us happy. We also really, I think one of the key pieces is reframing the way we think about happiness. So seeing it as a practice, as something that we have to continually work at our entire life if we want to live a happy life. You can't just coast. You won't ever arrive there. It really is something that you have to work for and to work at. And it can be fun. Like work doesn't have to be this taxing, terrible, drudging thing, but it does require effort and deliberate practice. Happiness doesn't just come like via osmosis. We really have to put in the effort, just like anything good in life, right? Like you really have to put in the effort to get that.
What does your happiness practice look like as a happiness
Mm.
researcher? I feel like that's a lot of pressure on you to make sure you have a good happiness practice.
You know, so one of the cool things is that when I read research, I like to try all the things that I'm reading on myself, do my little N of one study and see. And I think that it's really important to try the different things that you read about or share in your talks or research or books or whatever I'm doing at the time. And so for me, and this is the thing, I actually was really struggling when I finished my PhD. I wanted to publish my PhD as a book because nobody reads PhDs. They're very boring. But the content was good. And so I thought, I can't really write a book about happiness because like telling somebody how to be happy, because I find that idea kind of disempowering because nobody can tell you your happiness except for you. People can make suggestions. I can tell you what the research says might be good places to look, but the only person that knows your happiness, Vanessa, is you. And if you're listening, the only person that can tell you how to be happy is you. So there's that piece. Plus, what makes us happy can change over time, right? What made you happy when you were 16 was probably like getting your driver's license and driving around. And now for me, what makes me happy is not having to drive my car because I hate finding parking in downtown Toronto, right? So different things can make us more happy. And then with that too, they change over time, and each person almost has like their own like equation of different things that make them happy. And so for me, what right now, and again, I do the same thing. I'm checking in with myself all the time. I'm seeing how I feel, noticing the things that do bring me more joy. Like actually, so one of the things I've taken up recently is puzzling, like doing puzzles.
I've heard good things, that and coloring.
Yeah. So my mom growing up would do puzzles and I hated it. I found it so boring and like so tedious. And it like, she'd want me to puzzle with her and it felt like effort and work. And then recently I just, for whatever reason, decided to try a puzzle, and I find it so fun. And I love the quiet. Like I don't put on a podcast, I don't put on an audiobook, and I don't put on the TV. I just sit and I look at the puzzle and I do the puzzle. And it's actually something that now I really like, that quiet time, because for me, my brain is on all the time. And how I talked about earlier, like carving out that time to be quiet, I find it really hard to sit still with nothing, like very difficult. So my puzzling is kind of like my gateway to that, because it's quiet, but it still gives me a little bit of something to do that doesn't require like a lot of distraction or anything like that. So taking the time to work on my puzzles has been something that lately has been making me really happy. I mean, fitness, this is kind of like so overdone. I hate even saying it, but it really is true in terms of moving your body, and whether that be in a yoga practice or a walk or a workout, doing things to move your body is such an important piece of a happiness and mood. I'm not only do I think that, the research all supports that as well.
Yeah,
And, I think for me, one of the other things, so let me back up. There was an 80-year longitudinal study done at Harvard called the Harvard Adult Development Study. And basically what they found was that the number one predictor of both long-term health and happiness was social connection. And, it kind of makes sense. Like we're social creatures as humans, but really above how much money you make, above your gender, above where you live in the world, having at least one or two close relationships where you can go confide in somebody and they can confide in you is the number one predictor of both your health, but your happiness as well. And so for me, really sitting with, who do I spend my time with? What are the people that I'm calling and talking to, and really prioritizing having time for my friends. Because especially like if, you're an entrepreneur, right? Like you're busy, you're working all the time. It can be hard to just go for a coffee date when you go there, to not just talk about work all the time, right? And so for me, one of the things that's really lately been making me happy is making sure that I make time for my friends and my family, and that when I'm there, I'm present. So I'm not hanging out with my niece on my phone and doing that, but really like immersing myself in that to really build and strengthen those relationships. That's been a huge one for me.
What I love about what you just said is that it isn't one thing that brings you happiness. And I think from this chat, maybe go journal, whatever it is, and write a list of, my happiness things, and look at all the things that bring you happiness. It's similar to what I do with my clients, of getting them to write out what brings you into alignment. And knowing that it doesn't have to be the same thing every day, but if you know roughly some of the things that do make you happy, then you can go to those and build different routines in your day to help to increase that in your life?
Yeah, for sure. And I love that you're saying that because, one of the things too is sometimes we have to do things in our life that we don't want to do and that don't make us happy. And that's called being an adult living life. And at the same time, we can really change our thinking around those things so that they don't have as detrimental or a profound negative or bad impact on our thinking or our feeling. So for example, maybe you're working, like when I was in grad school, for example, there was a lot of days where I would like sit in a lab and enter data for 8 hours, or like there was just, you had to grind. I was grinding it out. My friends were out doing fun things. And here I am, 30 years old, still paying tuition and sitting at a computer all day. And so, but the reality is I was doing that because I was working towards something bigger. So I would keep reshifting my mindset, because even though I didn't love what I was doing in the moment, I loved what I was building towards or working towards. And to me, I took my power back in that situation because I focused on what I could control, and it made me feel like I'm choosing this as opposed to it's happening to me. And when we can start to bring some intentionality into why it is that we're doing what we're doing and the sort of bigger picture, then sometimes when we're in the thick of things, it doesn't need to be so like sticky,
Yeah. What I'm hearing from you is happiness is always a choice. And you can choose to shift that perspective to see how can you be happy in this moment.
Yes, absolutely. And the caveat to that is that, if depression is a thing. It's a clinical, it's a medical thing. And if you don't have the building blocks in your body to say produce serotonin or dopamine, like some of these neurotransmitters or hormones in our body, no amount of gratitude or doing these things is going to make this profound shift. So if you're listening and you're not sure, like those are really important conversations to have with your doctor, because modern medicine is here for a reason. And so sometimes we need the help to get those building blocks in place so that then we can build our castle. So that's kind of the caveat to that. At the same time, no matter what you're doing, when you start to focus on the positive things, like practicing gratitude, for example, it's a really positive thing, and it's moving you in the right direction. It's starting to orient you to where you want to go with intention, as opposed to just drifting through life.
Yeah. Intention is one of my favorite words,
Yeah.
because that comes into play in everything, in work, in your friendships, relationships, and your relationship with self.
Mm-hmm.
When I say, and when you heard the theme, one with self, one with others, one with purpose,
Mm-hmm.
how do you feel that happiness is that red string that ties that all together?
I love the theme because I've been reading a lot of like Buddhist books lately, and kind of recognizing that we're all one, but we're not independent. It's like a collective, right? And so this is something like I've been really thinking about lately, is realizing like we don't live in isolation. We don't live in this little bubble. Like how we are affects other people too, and other people affect us. But at the end of the day, we live in our body, and really taking some ownership and being sovereign of our thoughts and things like that is a really important piece. And then where happiness comes in my opinion, is that we can live life and go through the motions, and that's cool. That's a choice that you can make. And another choice that you can make is to really prioritize happiness. And when you do that, I almost feel like it's like living your life watching like old school black and white TV versus watching a high definition TV. Same outcome. You're seeing the same picture, but it's almost like you're turning up the volume on your life. You're living your life. You're experiencing it. You're present, as opposed to going through. And if I have a choice of how I get to live this one short life that we all get, then to me, I want to do everything that I can to make sure my volume is up and I'm experiencing it and I'm really living and feeling my life. And so that's where happiness comes in, because every part of our life, and if you look at what motivates pretty much every behavior that you do, on some level, it's our desire to be happy. We all want to be happy. It's an innate part of being human, and that's a beautiful thing. And so if we can do everything in our power to focus on our happiness, which starts with us, it goes outward. And I think the other piece of this, because I was saying, we don't live in these bubbles. The research from Harvard actually found that our happiness extends 3 degrees from us. So focusing on your happiness really is not a selfish thing. I'll get asked that a lot too. Like Gillian, I really want to focus on my happiness, but I got to take care of other people, or I'm not selfish. All the data suggest that focusing on your happiness is actually one of the most selfless things that you can do. because not only does your happiness impact other people, you sort of see that ripple effect from it, the way we act matters to other people. Like there was even one research study done, you know how it's like trendy right now to buy coffee for the person behind you in line, right? Which is awesome.
Yep.
So in this particular study, researchers came in and they watched, and the person that bought the coffee for the stranger behind them saw an increase in their happiness because they did something nice for somebody else, a total stranger. And then that stranger, also not surprising, saw an increase in their happiness because someone that doesn't even know them did something nice for them. But in the same study, they found that anybody in the coffee shop that watched that action happen also saw an increase in their happiness. And so from that perspective, like when we think about how do we want to be in the world, the Buddha says, like, be the change you wish to see in the world. And I think there's so much going on, especially right now in the world, that we can't change. And one of the things that we can change, it starts with us and how we act. And when we can prioritize our happiness and really try to show up and do things that make us happy, not only is it going to change us, but it changes everybody we meet and then everybody they meet. So we think about that. How do we make a difference and a change? Then it starts with number one. It starts with you and those sort of things, and knowing that it actually does go beyond you because we don't live in these bubbles.
I just hear the theme of presence too as you talk, because it's so much about what's going on right now instead of what you want and what you have. And now in today's culture, and like you were talking about earlier with social media, I feel like we get stuck in that trap of, like you were saying, I will be happy when, and everything that we want because we believe that in the having of it, it will make us happier. Right. And so what you're talking about right now in this happiness practice, it makes me feel like I'm just being brought into presence again in that moment and in the happiness of the moment for myself and the others around me.
Yeah, it's like one of the practices that can really be beneficial in terms of boosting happiness is called savoring, as opposed to, say, striving, right? Where you're always wanting something else. You're striving for whatever it is that you want that you think is going to make you happy. If instead you can savor and you can look around, and when you're drinking your tea, like smell your tea and enjoy it and find in that moment the presence that you talked about, and bringing again that intentionality that we talked about to whatever it is that you're doing and enjoying the moment, as opposed to thinking about what you have to do later or where you have to go or what you forgot to do this morning, but being present and savoring and enjoying what you have. That's a really powerful practice, and not only in terms of boosting your happiness, but also I think a lot of it is linked to self-awareness too, right? And figuring out for ourselves what we're doing and having some control over our thoughts and our actions and our behaviors so that we can direct them the way that we want, so that we can choose to focus on the good things in our life. Because in every situation, like, you can look and find something good and you can look and find something bad. And our brain is actually, there's this thing called the negativity bias. So our brain is actually designed to look for bad things, because originally we had to run away from predators and we had to be on the hunt for danger. But now, not so much. But our brain has been kind of evolutionary evolved to that. So we actually have to work to focus on the good things in our life. It's like, for example, if you had 10 people give you a compliment today, Vanessa, and one person said one bad thing, when you put your head on the pillow at the end of the night, what are you thinking of?
Totally. Always the
Right?
negative thing, right? Yeah.
And that's where the presence and the awareness, we really have to bring into situations like that to reprogram our brain so that we start to look for the good and we start to see the good and we start to do that for ourselves. Because when we do that, that's when you can really start to not only have a happier life, but to have like presence and intentionality, and you're not just like coasting,
Yeah, this reprogramming also sounds like you have to have a lot of resilience, which is probably why you're coming out with a new course that also incorporates the happiness and resilience. Can you tell me that link and what this course is and what people can expect?
Yeah, for sure. So a colleague of mine, Dr. Ramit Billen, she has a PhD and researches resilience. So we're friends, and we were chatting one day, and we started to talk about, because I didn't know a ton of resilience research and literature, and she didn't know a ton of happiness. So we were kind of just talking shop, and we realized that because the goal isn't, like I said before, to be happy all the time. We're going to have these times where we are going through difficult times, when we feel challenged, when we feel like we need to pivot or move, or we're uncertain, or we're anxious, or whatever it is. So that's where the resiliency piece comes in. But then when you're resilient, you want to keep moving up. So remember I talked about that uptrend earlier, where your highs get higher and your lows get higher? So that's kind of happiness. And then what resilience does is it kind of smushes it together so things happen faster, so that you are able to bounce back. So you're not, it's the tool that helps you not marinate in those more challenging emotions for an extended period of time. And the more that we do work together, and we've actually today, our research study closed, our first national research study, and we are looking at sort of the links between happiness and resilience, because I almost feel like now it's a missing piece if we don't talk about one without the other. Like they really are not even complementary, but they're kind of non-negotiably need to be considered together. And I think when you start to build your happiness muscle by practicing resilience, that's when you can really start to see some really big and significant changes.
Very cool. I love that.
Yeah.
And so where can people find you and
Yes.
learn more about happiness research and how to bring happiness into their life?
Yeah. So my website is gillianmandich.com, and I'm Gillian with a G. So it's GILLIANMANDICH.com. And that's a good hub, and all my socials and everything you can find through there, or they're all at Gillian Mandich, my name. The other thing is if you go to Happy and Resilient, the word and, like AND, happyandresilient.com, that's where all my work with my colleague Ramit is. So we have a online course coming out, which is really exciting because it's to me just like this complete picture. Like I really feel like together we've honed in the gaps that we've identified in both of our fields and really combine them in a way that's different and useful and relevant and practical. So we have an online course there, and anything we're doing there in terms of like speaking or anything is all there too.
That's so awesome. I know you also have a free download. What
Yes.
is the free download and where can people find that?
So if you go to my website, gillianmandich.com, and then you /happy, so gillianmandich.com/happy, I have a free ebook that I wrote, and I'm just in the process of updating. So when this goes out, hopefully you'll have the newer version. I love updating my references and stuff. But basically, when we think about, I talked about how a big piece of our happiness is a skill-based learned behavior. Then when you are figuring out how do you build that 40%, what are the key things that research tells us will have a big impact on that? So I've got 5 of the top ones that the research says will help to build that. But then I've also linked the actual research studies in the book as well. So if you're one of those people that just wants top level, tell me what I need to do, that's there. But if you're one of those people that actually wants to dig in a little bit deeper, to learn a little bit more, to maybe even go pull the research studies and read them, then that's all there too for you. And it's totally free. And,
cool. I know that'll be good for the science people because they're
yes.
always saying, where did you get this information from? And that's awesome, right?
Exactly.
We all learn different. So it's
yeah.
great that you're able to give both of that.
Yeah.
You're able to cater to both of those learners, which is awesome. Honestly, I love this chat so much. What message or do you want to leave the listener with, and or do you have anything else to say before we finish up this interview?
You know, I think that the fact, like, I think sometimes, I don't know why this has been coming up a lot for me. I think because I'm one of those like type A perfectionist people, and making the shift from like, I don't need to be happy all the time, nor should that be a goal. I think sometimes we're so hard on ourselves and we don't take the time to celebrate the things that we're doing that are wins along the way. And even when you're listening right now, like celebrating the fact that you took time out of a very busy life to do something for yourself by listening to this podcast. Like, I think sometimes we get so caught up in everything that really remembering like, wow, like that's a great thing that you're listening with us right now. And to then take it one step further, because I think we often don't tell people nice things a lot. I know this sounds really weird. And I noticed it when I was in grad school, I taught yoga. And I would leave the yoga class and then nobody would say anything to me. And I'd be like, oh my gosh, did I teach a bad class? Did I teach a good class? Like, what's going on? But then you only hear about the bad times. And then I realized this happens a lot in life. Like, if you are listening right now and you liked this, then, tell us on social media or share it with a friend. Like, take it beyond just you and help to spread it out. So whether it be, this sparked something and you have that conversation with a friend, do something beyond just this, because that's how we kind of collectively go. And when we can talk about or look for the positive things and remember those things. Then I think that we talked about rewiring the brain to overcome our negativity bias. This is one of those like small practices that really isn't small at all. It's small in terms of effort, but big in terms of impact. So, celebrate yourself for taking the time to join us, and the fact that you are investing in yourself and you're not going through life in autopilot, because if you were, you wouldn't be tuned in right now. So that's a big yay and a big step one. And then it's up to you to kind of take it from there and see what happens.
That's awesome. Thank you, viewer, listener, for being here, for taking that time. And Gillian, thank you for having these conversations with me, with other people, and helping people to think of something a little bit different while bringing in that science, because talking about happiness from a scientific point of view is so important, so new, and I think it just continues to give validation to this entire topic and how we can be our best selves day in and day out. Yeah.
Well,
So
thank you. Thank you for having me. And thank you for doing this. The work that you're doing, putting this all out in the world, it really is such a gift. So thank you for having me and for doing this.
awesome. Thank you. And I hope you have a happy day if you are listening. We'll chat with you soon. Bye for now.